The sprint race is over and we are now only a few hours away from the start of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, but the question is, what did we learn from the sprint race that will be useful for this weekend's Grand Prix? Well, that is exactly what I am going to be looking at today as we do a data analysis of the Azerbaijan sprint race. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get to the video. So, what did we actually learn from the sprint race? Well, one thing that we learned was that from the sprint race, it's that the soft tyres will almost certainly not be used in today's Grand Prix unless we see a safety car towards the end of the race. The reason for this is because what we saw in the sprint was that everyone who tried the soft tyres all fell back towards the end of the race as the tyres wore out. The Alfa Romeo of Bottas started to sink like a stone towards the back end of the race. The Alpine of Esteban Ocon opted to put a set of soft tyres on during the safety car period. However, towards the end of the race, they stopped again to put on another set of tyres, and Lando Norris only got so far on the soft as well. This all happened despite there being a lengthy safety car period, meaning that really the soft tyres are going to be no good most likely during the Grand Prix. But if we get a situation where with 5 laps to go, there is a short safety car period, then we may see a few teams opt for putting a set of soft tyres on just to get to the end of the race. Now, what about the sprint format itself? Did we learn anything or see anything interesting this weekend with the new sprint format? Well, the answer is no, not really. The addition of sprint shootout was, in a way, a good idea to try and spice things up a little bit. However, for me, in the end, it was kind of flat, because for the most part, the grid in the sprint was the exact same grid for today's Grand Prix, with the exception of George Russell being a bit higher up in the field because he did not get caught out like he did in real qualifying. Personally, sprint is not for me, and the ways to improve sprint, in my opinion, will probably, in the end, do nothing other than devalue what is the overall spectacle of a Grand Prix. With that out of the way, let's get into some data analysis now to see what we can learn for today's race in terms of who is looking where, in terms of performance, and let's start with a couple of teams who look to be struggling a little bit this weekend, and that is the Haas team. For Haas, the sprint race highlighted something that we saw way back in the Bahrain Grand Prix, and that was that they were really struggling with tyre wear. At least that was the case with Nico Hülkenberg, because as this graph shows, he was the slowest car all sprint long, with having very little pace in the Haas car. Another team that had very slow pace in the sprint race was the Alpine team. In my qualifying data analysis video, I mentioned how Alpine were very much on the back foot going into this weekend due to them having such a small amount of time on track, and that it was somewhat likely that they were only going to have got the setup wrong, and based on yesterday's sprint race, that was probably the case. And to show that, let's take a look at the data between the McLaren of Oscar Piastri and the Alpine of Pierre Gasly, as both Ocon and Norris were struggling with other issues during the race, slowing them down a little bit. And from this, we can see clearly that the McLaren has been a faster car this weekend. And now actually, let's take a look at their fastest laps and see what we can learn. The data here shows us that in this instance, McLaren were really faster than the Alpine team in just about every area on the circuit. I think this sprint race is really going to worry the Alpine team, and this is because in theory, Baku should have been good for them. But due to all of the issues they have faced, Alpine are staring down the prospect of not scoring a single point. However, their main rivals in the championship, which is of course the McLaren team, it seems like things for them are actually looking very good. McLaren took a risk yesterday with having one driver on softs and the other on mediums, but I feel like in the long run this has actually worked out for them as they have been able to gather data and see exactly what works best for them. Piastri had a much better finishing result than Norris yesterday, but that was down to the softs that Norris had on his car. But when Norris bolted on the mediums, as the telemetry data shows, Norris was able to take the fight and, in a way, beat his teammate Piastri in terms of pace. Going forward, McLaren have a better understanding now how the softs do, or I guess don't really work for them. This graph from the sprint race shows the top speeds that each driver is able to achieve. Note these are higher than qualifying top speeds, and yes, Red Bull is not at the top, but that is kind of expected since Perez blew past Leclerc early on in the race and Verstappen had damage. But for McLaren, you can see something that for them is not great. They are slower than the Williams of Albon in a straight line. And let's take a look at the fastest lap of both Norris and Albon to see where each driver was faster. For Albon and Williams, once again, their car is incredible in a straight line, but through the corners, unsurprisingly, they are struggling. With this in mind, I do have a feeling that Piastri at the start of the race could be vulnerable to the cars behind him, such as Esteban Ocon, George Russell and Alex Albon, due to all of those cars being faster in a straight line. And in general, the Mercedes is a faster car than the McLaren. Speaking of the Mercedes team, let's take a look at the likes of Mercedes, Aston Martin, Red Bull and Ferrari, and what did we learn from them which could be useful for today's Grand Prix. Well, the first thing we learned was that for Aston Martin, this will be by far their toughest race so far this year. Starting the Grand Prix in P6 and P9, they will be really needing their DRS to work consistently all Grand Prix long. The team have been really struggling with DRS issues all weekend long. When it works, they have alright top speed, but when it does not work, it is very clear that they are lacking and missing out. However, there is one thing that is going to work in their favour, and that is the tyre wear. Fernando Alonso all sprint race long was able to maintain the pace very consistently, lapping between 144.5 to 145.0 all race long. This tells me that the main Grand Prix itself, we could see Aston Martin move forward if tyre wear becomes an issue, at least for the Ferrari cars. Aston could be in with a good shout of moving forward, I feel, at least with Fernando Alonso, and of course Lance Stroll should move forward from his lowly P9 start. For Mercedes, they are right now locked in a tight battle with Fernando Alonso in terms of pace, as this data shows. However, I think Mercedes are going to be a little bit disappointed that George Russell was knocked out in Q2 instead of making it through to Q3, because in the sprint race, George had excellent pace. And in the race, he was able to take the fights, at least for a little while, to the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. This should give some confidence to the Mercedes team that they are still on the right track and moving forward with their car. The pace was good, as this shows. He was not too far away from what Max was able to do in the Red Bull. For his teammate Lewis Hamilton though, it's really not easy to say. His pace was significantly slower than George. However, I believe the reason for this is down to the fact that Lewis was in no man's land, meaning there was nothing and no reason for him to push the car. This means judging where Lewis may be tomorrow is hard to say, but if we base it off of something similar to George, then I believe tomorrow Lewis has a possibility of getting himself into the mix and getting himself a top 4 finish. For Ferrari, this was by far their best showing all year long. Charles Leclerc started from pole position and was able to take the fight to one of the Red Bulls. Now, this may have been because the Red Bull in particular was damaged, but it is certainly good to see. Saturday also showed that Friday's pole position was not a fluke, as Leclerc was able to manage to get pole position twice in a row. For the sprint race though, we did start to see something towards the end of the race, which is a negative for Ferrari. Leclerc's pace all of a sudden dropped as we got towards the end of the race, and I don't think this is just because he was backing off, because Max was still breathing down his neck at this period in time. I think this could signal a potential issue in the Ferrari game, and it is something we have spoken about before, and that is the tyre wear. If we look at the lap times and compare Perez, Alonso and Leclerc, we can see exactly what I mean. Perez does back off massively on the last lap, but look at Leclerc. He starts to have a fairly consistent drop-off, which tells me that in the race tomorrow, Ferrari are going to be limited by tyre wear. And finally for Red Bull, the sprint race was, for the most part, business as usual. Yes, Perez and Verstappen started behind Leclerc, but Perez, in a fully fit Red Bull, was able to fly past Leclerc during the opening stages of the race, and from there Perez was able to maintain pace, whilst Leclerc was starting to drop off. This gave Perez a decent lead by the end of the race, and for Red Bull in the main Grand Prix, if they don't get Leclerc straight away, then I believe it will only be a matter of time before they both get past him, so they just need to keep it calm. For Max, things were not straightforward, and the reason they were more difficult was because of this huge hole in the side pod, which was caused by an incident with the Mercedes of George Russell. But tomorrow, with him starting on the front row alongside Charles Leclerc, all he needs to do is play things safe, and probably by lap 3 he will be leading the race and away into the distance. Just before I get into my top 5 for today's race, I just want to make a quick note to say I should be live later on today with a watch along for the Grand Prix, so be sure to join me for that. Now, what is my prediction for the top 5? Well, in 5th place, I'm going to go for Fernando Alonso. In 4th place, I'm going to go for Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. Charles Leclerc will finish in 3rd place on the podium. Sergio Perez will finish in 2nd, and Max Verstappen will win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. The question is though, what do you guys think? In the comments down below, let me know, and as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.